Right, so I just want to begin with a video. Just to put it in context, Oscar's accident received quite a bit of media attention, and this is a current affairs episode, and we'll just take you back to that time before mobile phones and the internet, back to 1997. This was about a year after Oscar's accident.
Old captured our hearts when he somehow survived after falling from a 5-storey building. The fall broke both his legs, but it failed to break his remarkable spirit. The road to recovery has been long and hard, but Oscar's irrepressible personality has kept him going through the tough times, and now he's making the most of his cheeky smile. Laura Sparks reports. Give him a big smile.
And do you like smiling? He looks like any other charming little 4-year-old, but Oscar Blaxland has more to smile about than most. He's a walking miracle.
I put it through the window.
Did you?
And I climbed up that window. And I bang.
Like that?
This was Oscar a year ago, explaining to Today Tonight how he fell out of the window of an apartment block, plunging 5 stories to land on the hard cement pavement below. Both legs were broken in 3 separate places. Doctors didn't expect him to last the night.
They were totally amazed. They couldn't believe that he'd fallen as far as he'd fallen. The ambulance officers were asking me 3 or 4 times, where did he fall from? So, and the doctors were the same. And basically they were prepared for Oscar to be gone the next morning. So they were preparing us for him not to laugh.
Do you want to walk on heels?
Sure.
18 months down the track, the amazing miracle is something Oscar still vividly remembers.
And I broke my bones.
Did you really? Where did you break your bones?
Inside. I broke 2 bones. One here, one here.
He's just now starting to realise that he is a little bit different to other children, that he can't run as fast, and sometimes when he's running along he will fall, one of his legs will give way.
And do you want to stand back to back? Stand back to back. Oscar, you look at that wall.
While his legs are still causing problems, Oscar is making up in other areas. His angelic smile and disarming nature make him the perfect child model.
This is my funny move.
Baby face, you got the cutest little baby face. There's not another one could take your place. Baby face.
We thought that it would be good for him to do something because he's a little limited physically with his legs. We thought it might be a good idea if he continued on doing that sort of work.
It makes the job easier when Dad takes on the job of photographer.
Can I do that?
Well, we need lots more light, Oscar.
Can I do that?
Sure, you
Which
press
one?
That one, the top one.
But it wasn't always this easy. Originally, Charlotte spent her days ferrying Oscar from doctor to physio to hydrotherapist. And it wasn't only the physical pain. Oscar was also suffering mentally.
He had problems where he'd get sort of flashbacks while he was sleeping. He'd get that sensation of falling. He'd just be screaming and clutching onto the bed saying, I'm falling, it's very, very bad, I'm falling. It's really bad this time, I'm falling. What happens to Priscilla's slipper?
Throw it out the window.
Yeah, throw it out the window.
It was counselling sessions like this one that helped cool the fear in Oscar. But while the mental scars have healed, the physical problems are still proving painful.
About every 6 weeks he'll have 3 or 4 days where he can't walk, where his legs are particularly his right leg's very sore and he can't walk. He doesn't connect that back to the accident. He just thinks it's something spontaneous.
You push higher.
Okay, we'll go high.
No, you had to pull my t-shirt.
Right, like this.
Yeah.
1, 2.
Woo.
Even today, Oscar is still amazing doctors with his recovery. They've even delayed an operation he was supposed to undergo at the end of the year.
Although they don't think his x-rays look too good, they're very, very happy with how Oscar is in himself and how much he is able to do despite having x-rays which show a lot of damage actually to his femur bones and growth plates. So they won't be doing any surgery until he himself is sort of physically disabled.
I want to be a policeman and an ambulance officer.
You're going to be a busy man.
It was a miracle. It's just God intervening, and can't be explained any other way.
How lucky do you feel?
Very, very, very lucky. I don't think lucky is the word though. Blessed. I feel very blessed.
We lost that footage for quite a few years, and it wasn't until Oscar was about 21 that we found it. And so I said to Oscar, do you want to sit down and watch this with me? And we watched it, and afterwards I turned off the TV, but Oscar just sat there staring at a blank screen, and I said, Oscar, are you all right? And he just stayed staring at the TV, and I said, is everything okay? Are you all right? And he turned to me and he said, Mum, you were once really good looking. I know. And sometimes people say to Andrew, is that you? Is that you in that video? And he goes, no, that's Charlotte with her first husband. So there's quite a lot to this story that I won't have time to touch on today, but it is available in this book with lots of pretty pictures, and Oscar himself has written a short chapter about how he feels about what happened to him, and Andrew's also written a little bit about what he went through with some getting through PTSD and things. So when we read the Bible, we always love those stories of God performing miracles, and I could always had no trouble believing them, but I never really thought I would experience anything like that, because I just thought I'm just too ordinary. But that's just ridiculous, because when you read the New Testament and you read about Jesus performing miracles, they happen on people so ordinary their names are not recorded in history. It's the woman with the issue of blood, the man with the shriveled right hand, the boy who was mute, and the man that was lowered through the window. So if you're feeling a bit ordinary today, get expectant, because you're well positioned to experience a move of God on your life. So for a bit of background, Andrew and I met when we were 16 at Barker College in Hornsby, and Andrew was already a Christian, and a few weeks into that year I went to a Christian outreach, and there was an altar call, and I went forward and gave my life to Jesus, and we'll be giving everybody here an opportunity to respond to an altar call later this morning. And then we dated from the age of 17, we got married when we were 20, Oscar was born when we were 27, Priscilla at 29. We do have a third child who was born 12 years after Oscar, but he's not in this story, but I do like to just let everyone know there is another child. And then so everything sort of spiraled downwards. Oscar was chronically unwell, always having accidents. It seemed like a major project keeping him alive. And then Andrew's business plummeted. We'd built a house, and interest rates shot up, and we couldn't afford to live there. And so just before we were homeless, my parents bought an investment property, and they said, look, come and move into this. It was a semi in Mossman. It was very unrenovated. It was leaking. And they said, you can live here, but in a few months you'll have to move out because we're going to bulldoze the back half of it. So we went, okay. So we moved in on the 23rd of December, 1995. And in the new year, Andrew started a new business as a real estate photographer. And I started working for my friend that you saw on the video. She's a fashion designer. She had a children's label. And I said, I'll sell the clothes through Party Plans. So that's what I was doing. I got Oscar into preschool 2 days a week, and that helped me catch my breath. And I just thought we'd come out of a really dark time and things were going to now be on the up and up. And I felt more calm and settled than I had in a long time. And then came the 19th of March. So on that day, beautiful clear blue sky, lovely warm autumn day, Andrew went off to his first appointment. And as he was driving, he heard God say to him, start praying for your family and thank me for them. And he went, oh, and as he started praying, he became very emotional and started crying. And he got to his first appointment and he just got on with the day. It was a very busy day, and he didn't give that any more thought. And meanwhile, I dropped Oscar to my mother at Clara to look after him for the day, and I went off to Avalon with Priscilla, and I did this presentation for the children's clothing, and then did some shopping in Avalon Village, buying dressing gowns, and tried to buy slippers for both of them, but I couldn't get any for Oscar. They didn't have any in his size. Then drove back to Clara. Mum said, oh, he's just had the best day. Refused to have a sleep. And I thought, yeah, that'd be right. And she said, oh, he's been out in the garden. He's just had the loveliest day. It's been fantastic. And I said, oh, great, okay, thanks very much. Popped him into the car and home we went to Mossman, and then had to run around and do all those things that you do with two small children at the end of the day. And then Andrew came home and he said, oh, Tony rang, that's a real estate agent, and he said he wants me to go out tonight and take a photo of the sun setting over the harbour bridge from an apartment that's going to auction tomorrow, and they want that photo on the screen when they do the auction. And I just got really angry and said, listen here, you said you'd babysit. You knew I was going out tonight, and now what are we going to do? And because we hadn't been living there very long, I didn't really have many babysitters, and so I made a couple of calls, couldn't get anyone. And then Andrew said, oh, well, Tony told me that the apartment's empty. He said, and the furniture was moved out today. I'll just take them with me. Oh, okay. So dressed them in the dressing gowns, put Priscilla's new slippers on her feet, and Oscar ran out with no shoes on into the car. They were super excited to be going out because they thought they were going to bed. And you know what it's like when you tell children, oh, no, we can go out. And then as he was about to drive off, I went, oh, Andrew, where's Devonshire Street? Because in those days you had to look up the street directory, which is a real chore. And he used to work in Chatswood, so I thought, well, he'll know where it is. And he said, oh, you just go down Mowbray Road, and it's one of those streets off to the right. And quite often we just don't think God's across all the little details in our lives. We think that we just make flippant comments like that. But if I hadn't have said that, no one would have known where I was that night. There would have been no way to contact me. So this is how the seed got sown, so that later on in the night, Andrew would be able to say, Charlotte's in Devonshire Street. So I drove off, found the house, parked right outside the door, and ran in and met this lady, Janelle, and she gave me a glass of champagne, and she said, and then very soon the house filled, and I did the presentation, and then I had my head down, I started writing up orders, and I heard the doorbell ring, and I thought, oh, they're late, just about finished here. And then I just got this tap on my knee, and I looked at the hand, and I don't know why, but it just looked like my little sister's hand, Lucy, and I looked up, and there she was, and she lived at home with my parents, and I was sort of like, oh, hello. And she said, Oscar's had a wee accident. And I went, oh, right. And then Janelle was at the door and she was saying, everything's fine, you just go, get going now, off you go. And I thought, where am I going? And then she was standing with my sister Kate, who lived in the eastern suburbs. And I thought, how is she here? And so Kate said, Oscar's had a fall. And I went, oh, okay. And you need to come to the hospital. And I went, oh, gosh, something else, And so they just sort of hurried me into the car, and I just realised, hang on, I haven't got my bag, my keys, my jacket, nothing. And we were driving along, and I thought, it must be serious that they've come to get me. And I said, well, how far did he fall? And she said, 6 stories. And I went, oh, right. And I was so confused. I just thought, is that far? Like, how high up is that? And then I thought, well, something must have broken his fall. And I said, so what did he land on? And she said, well, there was nothing to break his fall. He landed on the concrete driveway. And I went, oh. And she was slowing down to go for this red light, and I said, just drive straight through. And so we got to Royal North Shore, and always when we're going through dark times, sometimes at the time we can't see it, but if you look back, you know that God was with you, and he was providing moments of comfort. And the comfort for me at that time was that that's where I did my nursing training, and I'd lived at that hospital for 3 years, and I'd worked in that emergency department, so I knew the layout, and there is comfort in having familiar surroundings. So we walked in through the double sets of plastic doors, and in the corridor, Andrew was on a chair with his head in his knees, crying. And around the triage desk I've got 4 sisters and their partners and my parents. And someone yelled out, "We've got the mother. The mother's here." And everybody looked at me and then just burst into tears. And I'm like, "What's happened?" And he was in the door to the resuscitation room was closed, and I knew that's where he was. And I went to go into that room, and a doctor came and said to me, "You can't go in just yet. We're just putting some chest drains in, and you need to understand that Oscar's had a fall from considerable height. It's 20 metres or around 60 feet. And I went, "Oh, okay." And he said, "We know he's got 2 broken legs, but we're not too concerned about those at the moment. We have checked his liver, kidney and spleens, and they're all okay, and that's a good thing." And he had me by the hands, and he gave my hands a squeeze. And he said, "But we're not sure whether he's got spinal damage. He could be a quadriplegic or a paraplegic. He may have brain damage from hitting his head. And we're concerned also he may be blind, because you can detach your retinas when you have a fall from that height." I went, oh, okay. And he said, "But you can go in now and see him." And I went, "Oh, all right." And I was standing sort of at the door, about to open the door, and I thought, oh, look, he's probably going to be so traumatised and just so black and blue and bloody, and I just didn't, I was just, dreading the thought of what he might look like. But I opened the door, and there was it was very brightly lit. He was lying completely naked, just a little 3-year-old on a big adult bed, and a team of people around him, and they didn't have a paediatric ventilator, so they'd put him into an induced coma, so there was a woman standing at the head of the bed just what they call bagging him, giving him his breaths, and he had the mask over his mouth and nose, and he had the hard collar on around his neck, and he had a catheter and IVs in all his arms, and they had the chest drains in, and there was really nowhere where I could touch him. It's such a small little person with so much equipment. But I looked at him, and it was just another moment of comfort that God gave me. Was he actually looked quite good. He had some grazes across his lower abdomen, which were from the aluminium edge of the window as he shot straight out, and he had little chunks of skin missing from his toes, which made me feel really bad that I'd let him run out the door in bare feet. But I sat down beside him, and I just didn't know where I could touch him, but I just touched his head, and there were lots of lumps, so that he'd hit his head pretty hard. And then they needed to do something else with him, so I had to go back out, and there was this groaning noises, and my mother said, somebody needs to see Andrew, he's not right. And he'd gone into really deep shock, and the groaning noises were coming from him, and so the doctors gave him a pretty big dose of Valium, and they put him into the meeting room next to the resuscitation room, and he laid down on a couch. And then the doctor said he wanted me to go back in, and on the wall they had all these x-rays. They'd been taking x-rays every 15 minutes. And he said to me, what we're concerned about is that in each, you can see in these x-rays more and more shadowing over Oscar's lungs and heart. And he said what can happen in a deceleration fall or in a high impact crash is that you can tear open one of the major arteries around your heart. And he said, this is what we believe has happened to Oscar, and if that's the case, there's nothing we can do for him. And he said, now would be a good time to talk to your family. And I went, okay. So we went out, and we went into that, with my parents, went into that room where Andrew was. And he explained that to my parents, and he said, there isn't any more that we can do for him, but we can move him to Westmead Children's Hospital. And so they organised a helicopter, and it took till around midnight to get all that organised. And they put him on a little trolley bed and wheeled him out, and they said, would you like to just spend a moment with him? And I'd asked if I could go on the helicopter, and they never let you. On board, they only have enough people to treat the patient. So if anything happens and you become hysterical or panic attack or whatever, that they cannot treat you as well. So you're never allowed on board. So I was just standing in this corridor, just me and Oscar, and just wanted to speak positively, and I said, I'm going to see you again at the Children's Hospital, and you're a very lucky boy to have a ride in a helicopter. And told him how much I loved him, and that was probably the most difficult moment, because I wasn't sure whether we'd still have him with us when I next saw him again at the Children's Hospital. So then, meanwhile, a lot of people had gathered at the hospital. Andrew's parents were there, and Andrew's father was an Anglican minister, and they'd spent many years as missionaries in South America. And before they left their house to come to the hospital, they'd called a lot of their network of prayer warriors, and they told us there were around 50 people that had agreed to stay up that night and pray for Oscar's survival and healing. So we then, one of my sisters looked after Priscilla, and my parents drove us out to the Children's Hospital, and we got there probably at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I just remember walking in. The foyer was dark, there was no one around, it was freezing cold, and we found our way to the intensive care unit, and someone met us in the corridor and said he's survived the flight. And they said, just go into this room, and it was like the size of a classroom, and they said, just wait here, and we're just changing all the equipment over from child flight to the hospital equipment, and we'll be with you soon. Well, 2 hours later, a doctor came in, and he basically said that it was an incredibly grave and serious situation, and they weren't expecting him to be with us by morning, and they would let one person in to sit with him, and basically just to go and sit with him and just hold his hand. And So they put Andrew in a room where he could lie down on the ward, and then Mum and Dad said that they would leave me and they'll go, and they said, oh, when we get home we'll ring all your sisters and give them the update, and they said, and call us if anything happens. So I went in, and it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and sat beside him, and he was on a ventilator, but he looked quite heightened and quite stressed and anxious. He had that look on his face, and anyway, I just said, look, you've got a TV in your room, and when you wake up, you're going to be able to watch Sesame Street. It was his favourite show. And I just repeated that over and over, and they'd said that they were still concerned about spinal injuries because he wasn't, and brain damage, because he wasn't responding when they were asking him to wriggle his toes. So when I could tell when he was more asleep and more kind of awake, and so when he was awake, I'd say to him, wriggle your toes, Oscar, wriggle your toes. And just before 6 o'clock in the morning, I said, wriggle your toes, and I just saw this, like, such a small, like, little movement like that, and I went out to the nurse and I said, he's wriggling his toes, and she sort of went, oh, and she and the other nurse gave each other a look, like, you know, wishful thinking, yeah, one of those mothers. And but anyway, they came in, and I said, Oscar, wriggle your toes, and he did the same kind of, it was a hesitation, but then just this tiny little movement. And they went, oh, and they backed out. And then the phone rang at the nurse's station, and they said, there's a call for you. And it was my father. And he said, we haven't heard from you. And I said, well, Dad, he's wriggling his toes. And Dad had been expecting me to say he's passed away. And he was just so overcome that he just burst into tears. And so, I mean, he had 5 daughters, and this was the first grandchild, and it was a boy, so it was the apple of his eye. Then the medical team started arriving for the start of that day, and they were the cardiac specialists, and they said, we're going to take Oscar to theatre to do some diagnostic procedures to find out where the bleeding's coming from and what the damage is to his heart. And they brought him back by around lunchtime, and they said, we can't find any evidence of any bleeding, and there is no damage to his heart. So they handed us over to the orthopaedic team, and they came and said that he'd landed on his knees, chest, head, and he'd smashed through his epiphyseal plates, which are the growth plates in that you grow from those growth plates, and as an adult they're fused. And they said, well, Oscar's are now fused, his legs won't grow again, and they said he'll have to go into traction for 6 weeks, and you can go home after that. So that was the Wednesday, and by the Friday they weaned him off the ventilator, and he was trying to speak, and I was going, what was that? What was that? Because his vocal cords had been separated by the tube, and so he wasn't making any sound. And he kept repeating it and repeating it, and he said, I want to watch Sesame Street. So when people are unconscious, you can speak to them and they hear you, and yeah. So we then went down to the orthopaedic ward, and on the Saturday they said, actually, his fractures are so low down, he won't need to be in traction. We can put plasters on him and you can go home on Monday. So we did a press conference, and then on the Monday morning, and we went home after that, and with him in a wheelchair. He was in a wheelchair for 9 months. His rehabilitation took about 2 years. It was a pretty full-on time, but he survived. So what happened in the apartment? So when Andrew got there, he quickly realised that the apartment he was going to was on the top floor, and he took the children into the foyer and up the lift, and it was one of those old-fashioned lifts where you have to shut the 2 doors, and it creaks and groans ever so slowly up to the top. And he opened up the door of the apartment, and straight in front were the lounge room windows, and 2 of them could be pushed out and opened, and the windows were very low to the ground, only 3/4 of a metre off the ground. And Andrew thought, well, I'll take the children out onto the balcony with me. And the body corporate had just regulated that the railings had to be redone on the balconies to comply with new legislation, so that was 1.2 metres. So Andrew thought the children were quite safe with him out on that balcony. And he set up the tripod and put the camera on it and looked through, took one photo, and then he said, okay, kids, let's go. And he looked around, and Priscilla was there, and there was no Oscar. And he went into the apartment, and his eyes went onto those windows, and one of them had been pushed open just about that far. And he thought, no, he couldn't have gone out that window. But he went to the window, and he looked out, and he saw the power lines were 3 stories below, and what a big distance it was to the ground. He thought, no, he couldn't have done that. He couldn't have gone out that window. And he thought he's hiding, and so it was only one bedroom, so he started looking in all the cupboards, and he just wasn't there. And then he thought, well, he must have gone out the door. And he went to the door to open it, but it was deadlocked. And then he thought, but the alternative was so horrifying that he could have gone out that window, that he undid the deadlock anyway and went out into the corridor and was calling, and there was nothing. So he came back into the apartment, and he just saw that open window, and he just started like groaning and crying, and he felt God say to him, I'm here. What do you want me to do for you? And he went to the window, and this time he looked straight down, and there he was. He was about that big in his vision, just lying motionless, and he just thought, he's dead. And he gathered up everything and got into the lift, and had to shut those double doors and creak groan, taking forever to get to the bottom, and called the paramedics, called his parents, and also my sister rang about a computer problem and that she wanted him to sort out, and he told my sisters and my sister, and she gathered everybody, and that's how they all managed to get to the hospital. As Andrew was coming out of the lift, there was a man coming through the doors of the foyer, and he was very calm, lovely countenance, good-looking man, dressed in a grey suit. He looked like any businessman coming home from the city. This is Neutral Bay. But he didn't have anything in his hands. And he was walking towards Andrew, looking him in the eye very calmly, and he had a smile on his face. And as he approached Andrew, he said, it's okay, he's breathing. And Andrew went, oh, thanks, and handed him Priscilla and went running out and leant over Oscar, and Oscar said, I want mummy. He was still conscious, never lost consciousness. And the man came and stood behind Andrew, and then the ambulance arrived, and the man behind said, they didn't take long, they only took 3.5 minutes. And they were all right, and they all helped to sort of get Oscar into the ambulance, and the man handed Priscilla to one of the paramedics, and Andrew said, oh, thanks, mate, and off they went. And a couple of weeks after Oscar's accident, we were at church, and our house church leader actually gave us a handwritten note. It had been written by her brother, and he actually was a teacher at Barker College, the school that we went to, and he went to a Ruark church on the Upper North Shore. And the letter said that the night before Oscar's accident, a girl called Trish went to that Ruark group, and she turned up. She was 19, engaged to be married. She was training to be an early childhood teacher, and she lived at home with her parents in Northbridge. And she said, I had this dream last night, and it seemed so real, and there was a boy in it. And who was that little boy? And I said, well, what was the dream? And she said, well, there was this older style orangey coloured brick building, and right at the very top of it, a window opened, and this little boy leaned out, and then he fell, and he was falling head first, and there was nothing to break his fall. He was going to land on the concrete, and I knew he was going to die. And God said to her, pray for the little boy that he doesn't die, but that he lives. And she said, in the name of Jesus, let the boy live. And she said, then an angel appeared and tilted the boy upright, so he landed on his knees and not on his head. And Oscar is actually in medical journals because it's so unusual to land on your knees. They just never come across it before. He fell the knees, then chest, and then onto his head. And we believe that the man that came and met Andrew was that angel. And when you read the Bible, when angels visit, it's always to give a message of hope. The first thing they always say is, do not be afraid. And the first message they gave Andrew was to alleviate that fear that he had, that he was dead. And the angel brought that message of hope. He's breathing. And so those are the miracles of what God did to enable Oscar's survival. But I'm just going to jump forward in time now to people always asking me, why is it taking you so long to write this book? And the short answer is that I just never knew where the story ended. And about 3 years ago, our church had a thing you could go to, like sign up for a marriage seminar. And Andrew signs up for everything. So, well, here we go. We're off to a marriage seminar now. And so we, it was 3 or 4 days, and on the last night, Graham, who was leading it, that we'd never met him before, he went, yes, you, come forward. And I went, oh dear. And was it Cozzy? Oh, well, it was Cozzy. Anyway, forward to Graham. And Graham said, you got kids? And Andrew went, yes, 3. And he goes, what happened to one of them when they were little? I went, oh dear, right. And so Andrew told him a bit of that story, and he said, I want you to go back into that room when you first realised and you knew that he'd gone out the window. Because Andrew had always struggled all these years with self-loathing and feeling like an inadequate father, and that he'd allowed this to happen. So Andrew went back into that room, and Graham said, what's Jesus saying to you? And Andrew had a picture of Jesus being in the room with him, and he said, he's saying, it wasn't my fault. And then Graham said, and what about when you saw him down out the window? And Andrew had always felt terrible that it had taken him so long from when he went out the window to when Andrew was actually with him, because he spent that whole time on his own. And Jesus said to Andrew, he wasn't alone. I was with him and I saved him. So in that moment, Andrew experienced an unburdening and a healing from what he'd been carrying with him. What's interesting about God is sometimes you get your miracles instantly. Sometimes they're a long time coming, but everything is always in God's timing. And just in finishing, people often say to Oscar, well, what do you reckon about all of that? You know, what do you reckon that happened to you for? And he says, I don't know the answer to that. But if all it is that through sharing this testimony, it causes people to walk closer to Jesus, then it's all been worth it. So before we close today, I just want to give everybody the opportunity that's here today, if you'd like to walk closer to Jesus. And so I'm just going to ask Pastor Nick to come up and just lead people, perhaps, if they'd like to have the opportunity to come forward. And